Love. Love is never having to say. Carl had always been self-sufficient, which was good, considering he was pretty much a recluse. That changed following the day the corpses got up and started walking. Now he actually spent more time on the outside, gathering this and that, than he did anything else. Funny how life works out like that. Water, food, medicine, sometimes. Most of these things one takes for granted. But of course, the other thing wasn't. He called her Sarah. He called all of them Sarah. The zombies he kept in the shed just behind his house. To be more accurate, he never kept more than one at a time. It wasn't until that one wore out that he'd get another. And he was always careful. Kept the chain to the wall very secure. And he'd check it daily. Plus, he always kept his gun loaded. Number one rule in Zombieland, for sure. One final item he kept inside that tiny shed, other than the layers of dust that covered even older layers of dust and forgotten items that would have been best thrown away rather than kept, was a mattress. This wasn't for her, not really. It was for them. I think you know what I'm getting at. Can one rape the dead? Is that even a thing? He wasn't that kind of person, you understand, but with things being what they are, one makes concessions. Sarah, he wasn't sure how many there had been, stared at him from her position on the wall. She was barely conscious thanks to the tranquilizer-laced food he would give her on a daily basis. She wouldn't last more than a week. He could see the decay as if it were inching across her in an attempt to claim her from him. One more week, then he would have to find Sarah once more. He looked her in the eye. They were the same, he thought. Same, but different. But the differences could be pushed back in his mind. All he had to focus on were the similarities. That was enough. At least she didn't smell. That was the worst part. He tried to take care of them before that. Death. Nothing ever smelled that bad in his life. Ironic. Maybe not. One by one, things like that seemed to slip away from inside his mind. They didn't seem to matter much anymore, so why not? He took a few steps closer until he was just out of reach, only a few more inches from death. Worse than death. His gaze crawled down her body. Who was she before this? He was surprised at the thought. It was something that took him a while to erase from his head. Desensitization. Only way to survive. She had to go. Worst thing he could do. Start looking at him as if they were humans. He moved back, pulling the gun from his holster. The creature raised its head, just slightly. Tiny curl of the lip. She was coming out of it. Not that it mattered. He raised the gun, leveled it, and fired. One shot. Done and done. Another day, mostly sunny, or maybe that was partly cloudy. You knew the difference once. One of those things you looked up when surfing the internet was the best thing to do. He read it himself for the day. She was gone now. The queen is dead. Long live the queen. He didn't know what she looked like. He would just know it when he saw her. Preconceptions were a thing of the past. Time to take things like a leaf on a raging stream, one goddamn day at a time. The usual errands would apply even now. They just took longer to take care of, most of the day. But today was hers. He checked the area for strays and loaded up the gear. 15 minutes later, he was ready to go. And so he did. The sun's light danced across the hood of his car, definitely most sunny. He kept his eyes straight ahead. Keep yourself focused, no time for sightseeing. He really had changed. He used to like to stop and smell the flowers. No time for that now. Besides, flowers, they were all dead, their remnants strewn across the streets. Flowers don't grow anymore. Nothing grew anymore. Flesh or fauna. Whatever it was that started this whole mess seems like it was crossing the T's and dotting the I's. Efficiency. Only way to go. He'd gone further out than usual. Good thing his errand list was short that day. Short but labor intensive. They began to appear. These were the best of the best, furthest away from the city, the newest to the flock. Still heading for the city like the rest. Must be instinct. But what type? Because that's where the moles were? Or maybe it was more personal than that. Fuck it. He didn't ask and they weren't telling. And then she was. As if appearing between the ticks of a second. She was young, her hair blonde and cut short, wearing a summer dress of blue. And she was dead. He didn't really expect otherwise. Still, it was like she had only recently joined their ranks. A new recruit, he would call them. Service for the dead. Or life. Bad joke, but one had to laugh. Keep yourself sane. Strangest thing about her was just how clean she was. It was as if she'd recently bathed, her dress recently laundered. If he was a complete idiot, he would say it was love at first sight. Only love wasn't a commodity here or anywhere else, he suspected. Still, there was something about her. He had to have her. Not sexually, but of course that was a part of it. But it was a more directed passion. Shit, that didn't even make sense to him, but he wasn't much of a writer or a thinker. He just was. He turned the car around in order to get close. She didn't seem to notice as he followed, watching her shamble aimlessly through the parking lot. There were a few cars there, even more weeds. Clear enough so that he could follow her, look for that path of least resistance. At one point she came pushed against one of the cars, bouncing off into another direction. Towards him. He could see her clearer now. His eyes were the color of her dress. Blue. Dark blue. Like in that painting he loved. One by the guy who cut off his ear for some chick. Night sky, something or other. She came closer. This was good. They were alone. None of their more decompressed brethren in sight. Easy peasy. He put the car in the park, grabbed his trank gun, and opened the door. She looked up, just stared. No sign of aggression. For a moment, a very brief one, he wondered if she was still alive. Ridiculous, he thought, chiding himself for believing something so idiotic. She was dead, as evidenced by the look. The same as the others, as if lost in contemplation while still vacant inside. He slipped from the car. Taking a few steps closer, he raised the gun. Her expression never changed even after he fired the weapon. The dart set sail, striking her in the chest. It wouldn't take long now. He didn't know why they were still susceptible to the sedative, but it worked every time. Normally he would get back into his car and just wait. One never knew. Shit happens. But this time he didn't move. Just watched her as she glanced down at the dart protruding from her chest. She reached for it, the effects already coming over her. She gazed up, just as she began to stagger, then pitching forward. She moved for a bit on the ground, but it wasn't long until it was all done. He rushed over her. The stuff was good for an hour, but then again, shit happens. Less than an hour later, she was home. He found himself spending near 30 minutes looking at her, just sitting in the old easy chair he'd hauled home about 2 months back. He ran his hands over her face. I'm just tired, he thought. Just need some sleep. She was still unconscious, so he'd have to wait anyway. Shit. The mask. He was tired. He picked the mask up from his workbench and fastened it onto her face. It covered her mouth, similar to the one worn by that actor in the serial killer film. Well, he watched a lot of movies these days, but the horror ones never did it for him. He had enough of that shit outside. No sense bringing it into the house. She began to stir as he finished strapping the mask to her face. Moved a few feet back for a split second as her eyes flickered open. A bizarre thought crossed his mind. Do they dream? Of course they never slept, but what if they were unconscious? Like her. Jesus. He slapped his cheeks. Time for bed. Tomorrow, he's got enough supplies, no need to go out. Tomorrow will be his day. And hers. Something whispered in the back of his head. He ignored it. Focused on the action. And for the first time that he could recall, he felt sick. Thinking about what would happen, what he was going to do to her. Stop, he whispered to himself. And for the first time in a long while, he wished he had access to a shower. He charged from the room, slamming the door shut behind him. He stopped, listened. Still, nothing. She should be wide awake, thrashing, wailing, but there was nothing. He very nearly went back inside to scream at her, hit her, scream in her face. This wasn't natural. Him or her, none of it made any sense. Sleep wasn't easy that night. After that, time ticked away as usual, with one exception. He began to take chances, staying out past dark, exploring areas he knew to be unsafe, and all that time that rage grew, the disgust at himself, the hatred for her. Every time he touched her, he felt nothing. None of the usual fantasies worked. All he could do was think about the truth of his actions. He even questioned why he began in the first place. That's when he began to hit her, to jab her with his knife, to burn her. And all the while, she reacted with silence. He carried this hostility with him everywhere. It gnawed at him, torn at his insides, his heart, his brain. Nothing made any sense. This led to the hunts, something he swore he'd never do. What was the point? There was too many. Killing a few of them would mean nothing. But he didn't seem to care anymore. He used all manner of weapons. Gun, blade, even his own car. He would run them down, tie what was left to the bumper and drag them until they broke apart, pieces scattered in the wake. They were the reason for everything. For the world as it was now, and as it would ever be, except for her. She hadn't even made a sound. A threatening gesture since he found her. No blood on her or her clothes. Not a single drop. It was like when you would see a bird caught in an updraft. How it hangs there, like time standing still, but you could see it so clearly. It didn't fight to break away. It didn't struggle in vain against an impossible enemy. It just was. He still hadn't touched her. He would only watch, contemplate, perhaps, examine, and she had yet to acknowledge him or her environment. She just was. He began to contemplate past actions, what he'd done it for. What, for revenge? Was it an unknown part of him, a part that he would never have discovered when the world was normal? Was it loneliness? It had been so long since he had seen someone like himself, someone alive. He can't be the only one, he used to think. But as that thought began to slip from his mind day after day, he sought for something to replace it. Perhaps this was his new way, a dangerous way, but all there was left. He began to sleep less and less, His food supply dwindled, but it didn't matter as he ate very little. More contemplations entered his mind. All of them, all of the Sarahs. They had been beautiful when he found them, or as close as he could expect. And he would keep them, dominate them, bring them to their true selves, the living dead. They no longer had the right to appear human. They would suffer like everyone else had suffered, like the living, like him. He was the destroyer. He was their god. But still the questions came. His head began to hurt. He often found himself dehydrated, but it was more than that. It was as if all his thoughts had gathered together, screaming for attention. It was a puzzle that had to be solved. One of them was the solution, and he would find it. He would. He must. At night, he stood before her about 4 feet back. He felt a twinge inside himself. The old feeling was rising up again. But this time he resisted. Dug deeper to find those even older. The ones he hadn't seen since all this began. Since the world went to shit. He had to go back. Needed to. If not, then he would be lost. He stepped up, reached for the straps. Her eyes were open, but she barely seemed to register his presence when he broke her free. And then she was on him, her teeth deep into his chest. He could feel his heart pumping the blood through his body and out of the flesh, now torn away. Love, he thought. It means never having to say fuck it.